Well, good evening, patriots, freedom fighters throughout Saskatchewan, across the country, and around the world. Um, we live in interesting times, very interesting times, some would say, scary times, based on what's happening in the Ukraine. But again, we're going to have to stand out a little bit above everyone else and above all the noise, and add some context to what's really going on. I think it's important that people like myself and Salim and others do this and put ourselves out there as being outside the narrative that's been established by the media and the politicians, and really look at things as they really are. Um, so between tonight and Friday night, myself and Salim are gonna do that. We're gonna add some context to this whole thing. We've had a couple of discussions already in regards to this, but it is that important. But tonight, I want to touch base a little bit of about who Klaus Schwab is, where he came from, where he was influenced, where he was supported, who supported him. And there's actually some information that I was just presented by Salim, that I didn't realize. I didn't know. I didn't know actually that, for example, the World Economic Forum back in, I believe, 1971, the year I was born. Um, the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab was supported by the Club of Rome, which I find to be very interesting. I'm going to take a quick look at that right now here with you. Maybe I can just read a little bit of this. The most influential group that spurred the creation of Klaus Schwab's symposium, which is now the World Economic Forum, was the Club of Rome, an influential think tank of the scientific and moneyed elite that mirrors the World Economic Forum in many ways, including its promotion of a global governance model led by a technocratic elite. The club has been founded in 1968 by Italian industrialist Aurelio Pecci, a Scottish chemist, Alexander King, during a private meeting at a residence owned by the Rockefeller family in Bellagio, Italy. Um, and it goes on. I've included this link in the show notes on YouTube. Um, we have it posted on the website, so I encourage you guys to read this document. It sort of backs up a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight, and who Klaus Schwab is, who supported him. So, for example, and I've talked about this many times before, Alexander King, being one of the founders of the Club of Rome and supporters of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, as we've come to find out, this is what he said: "The common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome." So, social engineering, conditioning, like they have done heavily with the fear of climate change, like they have done heavily with the fear created by COVID, and now, of course, what they're doing and using through this crisis in the Ukraine. The real enemy then is humanity itself. Um, then, of course, we have Maurice Strong, the father of sustainable development at the UN. Isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? So, again, this is a plan that they've had in place for a very long time. This is nothing new. Christiana Figueres, who comes straight out of Socialist International, This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. So, these are the people that we're dealing with when we're talking about the Club of Rome, the World Economic Forum, the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, Sustainable Development Goals that they want to achieve. And how are they going to do that? This has always been their question. And they've decided a long time ago how they were going to do this was through social engineering, through fear in the masses. So the masses would accept essentially fascism. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this technocracy, the coming together of communism and fascism. So there's a lot more at play here when we, of course, most of the population only wants to hear what the media tells them. They watch the news, they think they're informed, and then they run away from the news thinking that they've, been informed and they know what's going on. They don't. They don't even go below the surface to understand what's really happening and who's, pulling the strings. Um, And of course, you guys all remember. Oh, hang on a second. Oh yeah, there it is. So this is an interesting discussion that was had. World Economic Forum young global leader wants opposition to Great Reset placed in China-style re-education camps. Um, Anyone who opposes the World Economic Forum's Great Reset program will be sent to Chinese style re education camps, according to a pledge by the World Economic Forum. Those who oppose Klaus Schwab's Great Reset should be imprisoned in communist China style re education camps until they no longer embrace freedom, nationalism, and the right to bear arms, according to Wang Guan, a World Economic Forum young global leader. So when we talk about, you know, for example, Trudeau and how he treated the truckers and their protest, um, and how he's treated Canadians across the board for the last 2 years, it's literally tyranny, and it's how they condition the people to accept tyranny. And again, it's through this mechanism of fear. And so this is who we're dealing with. This is reality. This is what they are saying. It's not what I'm making up. It's not me theorizing. It's me just being the messenger and sharing it with as many people as I possibly can so people wake up to the reality of what's going on. And again, people think they watch the news, they understand what's happening in the Ukraine. They have no idea what has transpired, what has led to this point, the amount of planning, coordinating, orchestrating that it's taken these people to get to the point where they are now. It and this is what people need to understand. They have to have context. I'm going to put this link in the chat. This is, and Salim, bear with me. There's just a couple of things I wanted to go through. So, this is an article, The Great Reset Phase 2 War. Basically, this individual, and like I said, I'll put the link in the chat, and you guys can read this for yourself. I'm not going to go through the whole document, but I do want to read the 10 points. The war between Russia and Ukraine is already causing unprecedented disruption to global supply chains, exacerbating fuel shortages, and inducing chronic levels of inflation. Well, we're seeing it, we're living it right now, all by design, all orchestrated. They knew this would happen. This is why they're doing it. Number two, and like I said, I'm not going to go through all the points and everything he writes. by all means, I encourage you to check it out. The war's economic fallout will lead to a dramatic downsizing of the global workforce. Again, by design, they've told us this. This is what the World Economic Forum, what the UN Sustainable Development people have all told us. They've all said that this is the direction they're headed. Number 3, war has significantly reduced Europe's reliance on the Russian energy sector and reinforced the centrality of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and net zero emissions, which lies at the heart of the Great Reset. This is exactly what the Great Reset wants: hyper centralization of governance over every aspect of your life. And if you look at the 17 goals, each one of these goals affects every aspect of your life. And we've talked about this a long time ago and numerous times in between. Number 4, food shortages created by the war will offer a major boon to the synthetic biology industry as the convergence of digital technologies with materials science and biology will radically transform the agricultural sector and encourage the adoption of plant-based and lab-grown alternatives on a global scale. Again, this is all manufactured. They've created all of this so they can move from the industrialized world, move from capitalist world, the free market world, a free world, to a global dominance, to a global governance, to global tyranny. Uh, and they've told us this, and they've been telling us this for years. It's just only a few of us have paid attention. Russia's exclusion from SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide International Financial Telecommunication, foreshadows an economic reset which will generate precisely the kind of blowback necessary for corralling large swaths of global population into technocratic control grid. And again, this is just another, we're watching it in real time. We're watching it happen. And so you see what they were able to do with Russia. They're going to be able to do this on an individual basis. If you don't play ball, if you don't accept digital ID, if you don't accept social credit, your score will then allow somebody to push a button, which will then put you in the situation where you can't go anywhere. You can't visit anybody. You can't maybe even go to work. It's total and ultimate control. This war marks a major inflection point in the globalist aspiration for a new international rules-based order anchored in Eurasia. With speculation mounting over the war's long-term impact on bilateral trade flows between China and Europe, the Russia-Ukraine conflict will catapult Israel, a leading advocate of the Great Reset, to even greater international prominence. And again, I encourage you to read how he justifies that position. It is now common knowledge that digital IDs are a central plank in the World Economic Forum's Great Reset agenda and are to be streamlined across industries, supply chains, and markets as a way of advancing the UN 2030 SDGs and delivering individualized and integrated services in future smart cities. So I want to just, at this point, I just want to mention something really quick, because I'm getting into these debates on Twitter regarding Pierre Poilievre and how he's denounced the World Economic Forum. Big deal. That doesn't mean anything, because Pierre Poilievre is still running for the leadership of the party that brought us globalism, that brought us this agenda, Agenda 2030, since 1992. Again, in 2008, Harper turned it and made it law, compelling the Canadian government to report our progress on achieving the goals of sustainable development to the UN. Now, at that same time, Harper also said in a television interview that Canadians will have to accept less sovereignty. I don't ever remember voting to accept less sovereignty as a nation, as an individual. I never voted for that. Neither did you. But so here we are. And then again in 2015, 1 month before the election of Trudeau, Harper signed us on to the Sustainable Development Agenda, which is why 1 week after the election, Trudeau was able to refer to Canada as a post-nation state. So when Pierre Poilievre denounces the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset, it doesn't mean a hill of beans, because he's never denounced the Sustainable Development Agenda, which is the agenda that the Conservative Party of Canada brought to Canadians. So it is what it is. I just needed to get that off my chest, because there's a lot of people that don't seem to understand that, especially on Twitter, that the party that Pierre Poilievre wants to lead is globalist. They are in concert with the World Economic Forum. They are in concert with the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. The simple fact that Pierre Poilievre is beating the war drums in support of the Ukraine tells you everything you'll need to know, especially after the discussion that me and Salim are going to have tonight and Friday night. You can't have it both ways. You can't denounce the World Economic Forum, but then beat the drums of war in support of what the World Economic Forum wants to gain from this crisis in the Ukraine. That was initiated by NATO. Number 9, Europe is directly in the line of fire once a hybrid war between NATO and the Sino-Russia axis is underway. 10, the economic implications of this war will be so disastrous that governments and the public sector will require a significant injection of private capital to address the financing shortfall. So again, it's all setting the table. And of course, you're all familiar with this. So that's interesting. The US won't be the world's leading superpower. And as we watch this, in real time, we're watching NATO, we're watching Western governments, we're watching these people literally push Russia into the arms of China. And we're going to see them come closer together. We're already seeing it. There's numerous reports of that happening. A handful of countries will dominate. Well, who do you think those countries are? Yeah, and of course, this is all part of social credit. There's essentially going to remove beef from the market economically, where people you won't be able to afford it. Your social credit score may already indicate that you've had your burger for the month and you can't have another burger until next month. And so your digital ID will have all that information in it. So you won't be able to access your bank account, your funding mechanism, because they'll control it. They'll control it all through digital ID, through digital currency, through all of this. They will have ultimate control of everything that you do, which is why they're telling you you'll be happy. So how many wars have been started by these people, creating enormous refugee issues, migration issues, immigration issues, refugee issues? I mean, every war that I've witnessed since 9/11 has been contrived. It's been based on stories and for a reason. And one of those reasons is migration and refugees and displacing people and moving them to the north, moving them and distributing them, redistribution of humanity throughout this, globe that we're all responsible for. Western values will have been tested to the breaking point. Well, we can thank our Western leaders for destroying our culture, our way of life, our values. And it's funny because, when they say these things and then they do the opposite as part of this social engineering, social conditioning project, it comes across as ridiculous. Yeah, so I think that was it. Just give me one sec. There was one other thing I wanted to show you. No, I think I already showed you that. Yeah, all right. So without further ado, I want to bring on my good friend Salim Mansur, who's been doing a lot of research and digging into all of this. So, Salim Mansur, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. Good evening to everybody.
Yeah. So, Salim, where do you want to start? I mean, there's a lot to digest, but basically, I'm just going to hand over the table to you and let you run.
No, don't hand over the table to me. The table is very heavy with too many material on it.
It is. It is.
Well, I mean, you began with Klaus Schwab, and I think we should talk about Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, the man, the people behind him, and how this man is now, as it is noted by a number of people, the most well-connected man in the world, and how he has arrived at this position where he is dictating a global policy in a manner in which we have already arrived at the destination that they had talked about way back in the 1960s and early 1970s. So I think that would be useful. The Ukraine issue is, right now the critical issue, but to fully understand the Ukraine issue, I think one has to create that perspective, that distance from what is now a matter of hysteria in the West. Um, I have basically, given up watching television a long time ago, but in recently, and concentrate on going back to understanding and reading and digging into the background, because when there is the crowd hysteria, and we are in a state of hysteria, and as you have been repeatedly saying, fear, then it is not a rational engagement with events, with individuals, with history. It is an emotional engagement, an emotional response. And when people are involved in emotions, then reason and facts and history is all obliterated, and then what in effect happens is the herding, and we are being herded, the population is being herded through the media, by the politicians, and the cacophony of noise. So I think we can maybe for this evening or a later part of this evening, I don't know how long we're going to go on this, but we can begin with Klaus Schwab. I think that's the question that you might want to
I think
ask.
it's important, if just for context, that we can start there. And I didn't discover this connection between the World Economic Forum and the Club of Rome until you had showed me that article. And I'm I can't say that I'm shocked. It doesn't surprise me. Of course, in this realm of things, nothing surprises me. But I'm surprised that I didn't know about it until now. And it makes perfect sense, of course, that this is the case.
Yeah. So where do we begin? Let's go back to the man himself,
Yep.
his origin, his family connection, because none of us, we do not arrive on the stage from a vacuum, But in the future, it might happen because people will be arriving from a vacuum, that is from a petri dish,
Right.
manipulated on a petri dish, and then they will have no background except the background from which laboratory they have come, Pfizer or
Right.
Moderna, or whatever.
Mm.
So in terms of Klaus Schwab, he was born in 1938, 1938 in
38,
Germany.
Ravensburg.
Yeah, Ravensburg in Germany, on the border of Switzerland. His father, Eugene Schwab, was an engineer and a businessman connected with this Swiss company, a very big Swiss company going back to the 19th century in terms of manufacturing and in agriculture. The name of the company is Escher Wyss, and his father, Eugene Schwab, was working out of Escher Wyss's German branch when Klaus Schwab was born. 1938, everybody can imagine, it doesn't take much to understand that was the critical year just before the war that broke out in 1939, in September 1939. These companies in Germany were very well connected and very well supported, and were working with the German Nazi Party. And again, because we are in a time period when anything that is referred to, whether it is today Putin or going back to the 1920s and 30s, trying to understand the history and politics and economics that is related to Germany under the Nazi Party, then any discussion gets wrapped up in emotion. And the emotion is, talking about it means, are you a Nazi? And so if you are, then you shut up and get lost. So that's the danger. But the facts are that Germany in the 1930s, late 20s and 30s, was in a horrible shape. Right. They had lost the war. Germans had lost the war in 1918. Actually, it's very interesting. The Germans had lost the war, but no foreign soldier was on German soil. Germany basically surrendered, called for an armistice, and ended the war because they realized that they couldn't carry on with the weight of the Americans now swinging in the direction of the Allies. The Americans had come in. Woodrow Wilson had declared war, joined the war. The background of that is also extremely messy. Wilson had campaigned in 1916 while the war was on in Europe, that he would not take America into the war. He was the peace president. And then soon after he got elected, he pushed America into the war,
Right.
and discussion is again full of controversy about who is responsible, just like what we are right now in the situation. Who is
Mm.
responsible for the war that has broken out in Ukraine? So Germany lost the war, sued for peace. The emperor abdicated, and the Allies imposed upon Germany a heavy, heavy economic punishment known as reparation that
Right.
Germany would have to pay for all of the consequences of the war to France, to Britain, and to the other Allied powers. Italy was an Allied power at that time. And Germany was squeezed and squeezed dry. And then came in the late 1920s, 1929 to be precise, the crash of Wall Street and the beginning of the Great Depression. And nothing was done to alleviate the German punishment, that is reparation, that Germany was having to pay. German lands were taken away, borders would be drawn, and Germany under depression meant inflation, cost of money just soared. Stories about people taking a wheelbarrow to buy a piece of bread, a wheelbarrow of money to buy a piece of bread.
Mm.
Unemployment huge, total despair in Germany, and the conflict within German society between the extreme right and the extreme left that started to grow and erupt. So on the one side, where the extreme right, even though they called themselves the National Socialist Workers' Party, which became the Nazi Party. On the other
Yep.
side was the communists. The Bolsheviks had taken power as a result of the horrible situation in Russia in 1917. And it is very interesting that the German government, which was at war at that time, was instrumental in bringing about the Bolshevik Revolution. They
Mm.
sent the man Lenin in a bullet train to Petrograd to lead the Bolsheviks. And that's exactly what happened. The Bolshevik, which was a minority party, did a coup d'etat. Well, the coup d'etat at that time is today called the Color Revolution. And
Mm.
we've seen
Right.
the coup d'etat, the Color Revolution. Those of us who have watched some of the situation, what happened in 2014 in Kiev, Ukraine, when a government was overthrown by
Yeah.
a public movement. So in the late 20s and early 30s, Germany is in a very, very difficult situation economically, and also in terms of its land occupied, the German population divided in Alsace-Lorraine on the west. Alsace-Lorraine was given back to France.
Mm.
The population was a mixed population, but there was a lot of Germans there. The Saar Valley on the Rhine was given back to, also was made demilitarized zone and put under the League of Nations control. On the eastern side, land was given to Poland, and the most notorious or famous city, Danzig, which was a German city, was given over to the Poles, and a corridor was created separating Danzig from the rest of Germany by, again, handing it over to the Poles. So all of this was a crisis situation, and in the midst of all of that, Hitler's party got elected in 1933. They staged a Reichstag fire, a false flag operation inside the Reichstag, the Parliament building in Berlin. Blamed it on the communists, and then eliminated the Communist Party, which was basically the effective opposition party. The Christian Socialist Union Party, they supported Hitler because the communists were Bolsheviks and godless and so on. So they supported Hitler in the parliament. Later on, they would be squeezed and removed too. The upper ruling class supported the Nazi Party, the military ultimately, the most important part, even though the military had been reduced by the war, by the Treaty of Versailles, they supported Hitler because the whole idea behind the support to Hitler was that the Nazis would be a brake, a check upon the communists. So the fight was between communists, the right and the left, and the people in the center, and in the members of the leading institutions, the bankers, the financiers, the general military staff. The president of Germany at the time was Marshal Hindenburg, a war hero from 1914-18, one of the most respected military officers who had become the president or who had been appointed the president under the Weimar Republic. He gave the green light to accepting Hitler to become the chancellor.
Yep.
And so in this context, Hitler comes to power in 1933, and then his policy for economic issues were to basically throw away all the expert opinion at that time around him, and saying that he's going to build and rebuild Germany, and that will be the way to bring back people into employment. So rebuilding of Germany began at a furious pace through deficit financing. The man who would become very famous under Hitler was an economist by the name of Schacht, Franz Schacht, who would later on, after the Second World War, I believe, would be brought into the World Bank to go around the world to provide policy, economic policy for development. This is back in the 1950s, early 50s. The number one or the most famous economist at that time was Lord Keynes. Lord Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, had written a book in the 1920s. The title was something like The Economic Consequences of the Great War, which is a reference to World War I, in which he argued that this economic punishment, the reparation on Germany, is massively cruel, and it doesn't make any economic sense, because how can Germany pay back to the Allied powers what they're demanding for Germany if Germany cannot produce?
Right.
If you don't have the wealth, then how can you pay it back? I mean, a simple observation. But anyhow, the Allied powers, particularly France, was not interested in to diminish the demands upon Germany, because French had their own problems at that time. And the biggest problem was, of course, depression. Everybody was wondering how to get out of this depression. And once America went down, that was a huge blow. So Hitler, remarkably, in terms of the economic policies that they put together, was one in which, within a matter of a few years, I mean, Hitler came to power in 1933, the war began in 1939. So we are talking about half a dozen years, in that gap. Hitler basically rebuilt Germany and made it into another, back into a dominant powerhouse, economic powerhouse, financial powerhouse in Germany. Germany was, in a sense, a European powerhouse before World War I. By the end of 19th century, Germany had become the dominant power in Europe in all aspects of, technology, economics, military, and politically. And that is one of the reasons why the other powers were ganging up on Germany, ganging up in the sense of the theory of balance of power.
Yeah.
So while Germany was connected with Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that was their powerhouse in Europe, Germany was a land power. Germany was being surrounded by Britain, France on the one side, and Russian Empire on the other side to squeeze Germany or to hold Germany. So that was the ganging up of the balance of power. And that miscalculation, the miscalculation in 1941 was the nationalism in the Balkans that led to a Serb assassinate the Crown Prince of Austria, Duke Ferdinand, and all the armies in Europe, they went on alert, and it was just the fact that they all went on alert meant that if anybody went down, they all mobilized in a sense. And if any one of the powers then started to de-escalate, having climbed up the ladder by mobilizing their army, the French did it, the Russians did it. The British is not a land power, but it's a naval power. They did it. The Italians did it. So everybody escalated to be ready to go to war. If anybody started de-escalating, it would, in a sense, send out the message that they are the weak player, and then they could be hunted down. So that was the situation. And when the assassination took place, Austro-Hungary sent a warning to Serbia. Russia was allied to Serbia. The Austro-Hungarians and the Germans were Protestants and Catholic. Serbia and Russia is Greek Orthodox and Orthodox Christianity. On the French side, they are again Catholic. So there was a religious factor in it. There was a nationalist factor in it. And each side sending ultimatum led to the explosion. And nobody wanted the war, but there was a war, and the war continued for 4 years. That was the same situation that you arrive in the 1930s, where Hitler makes his demands to correct the situation with the Treaty of Versailles. He wants the land back from the League of Nations, the Saar Valley, and in Alsace-Lorraine. He wants the German city Danzig to be returned to Germany. He makes a claim on Czechoslovakia, the German population that had been carved up and handed over to Czechoslovakia. And then Austro-Hungary, which was predominantly, especially the Austrian side, German. So he wanted to bring the German people back again within the German state, the Reich. And so that was the political situation. On the economic front, he had been immensely successful. That is, the government had been immensely successful and became a powerhouse, once again, a powerhouse. And that put the French and everybody else in a shiver on every side. And that can be seen, that people started calculating, that the leaders started calculating once again how you're going to stop the Germans. And
how does Klaus fit into this scenario?
That is his family, a family part of it, I was saying. So that whole side of it, I mean, a country is powerful in modern terms based upon its technology and its manufacturing and so on and so forth. And his father and family was deeply connected into that network.
Right.
And that is the background. So Klaus is born in 1938. The war, he's a young child during the war. They moved to Switzerland, which is a neutral state at that time, so they're not directly affected by the war. But you can now imagine, Mark, the child has been drilled into the politics and economics of what his father was serving. That is the rise of the German state under Hitler in the 1930s.
Yep.
The company that I just mentioned, Escher Weiss, was one of the leading industrial giants with its German branch in number of areas, but the area that needs to be put on the table is they were the biggest manufacturer designers of turbines for power plants, and it is that connection of producing power, energy, electricity, that was behind the German effort to get the bomb, the A bomb. So they were involved in it, and his father was involved in that. And later on, after the war, the Swiss company would become deeply involved in exporting its expertise in terms of energy and power plants to other countries and help them, those who were ambitious about acquiring nuclear power, and then, of course, the bomb, help them get that. And the one country that they worked with very closely was South Africa under the white regime. And the South African regime, the white regime, by the 1970s, were able to acquire the technology and build it up on their own to have their own bomb. It was once the white regime collapsed in the 1990s that South Africa was, in that sense, denuclearized. South Africa was basically like Israel, a country that had the capability to manufacture it. Well, that's where Schwab comes in. His father was there. And so this young man went to school in Switzerland, graduated like his father in engineering, but then he switched over to economics. And his father, according to what we know, the stuff that we have seen and read, advised him that the future lies in the synergy between economics, business, and engineering. And so his father said to him that he should go to Harvard and get his degree in economics, and that followed. In 1964, when Klaus Schwab was in his mid-20s, he arrived in America.
And went to Harvard.
He arrived at Harvard. And at Harvard,
this was a pretty defining moment in the life of Klaus Schwab, I think.
Very much so, because whatever was his background in terms of his father, his growing up, people around him who had helped build up Germany under the Hitler regime, and then subsequently, as the denazification took place after the Second World War, Germany was divided. One side was East Germany, which was communist, but West Germany, that's the Federal Republic, was part of the Western Alliance, Western system.
Yeah.
So the people who had been there in the 1930s and 40s were back again, except those people who were actually holding powers with the German Nazi Party. They were eliminated, or many of them were turned out, given their due punishment and so on and so forth,
or brought to America under Operation Paperclip.
The intellectual crowd came to America or went to other places, or were very necessary to rebuild Germany. So those ideas were not completely, eradicated. Those were very much there, and Klaus Schwab comes from that background, at the heart of that background, and that's what I was setting it up for. That Germany has a huge history. It is phenomenal history, and one must not in any way underrate that history because of the two world wars that have happened. It was a great civilization, great culture. So he arrives in Harvard, and he is doing economics, and in terms of economics, he's also interested in international relations studies and history and so on. He already has his engineering degree from Switzerland and Germany. And so this is the other side of him that he is now getting into. And he runs into taking courses that is offered in Harvard in both economic side and politics side with people who become the most important personalities in his life. I call them the three Ks. K, K, K. He runs into Henry Kissinger, who is leading in Harvard at that time seminar on international economics and politics, particularly international relation. And young Klaus Schwab is in his class. And it is in that interaction with Kissinger and Schwab, a relationship is formed. Kissinger himself was born in Bavaria, Germany, in 1923. So he's a German Jew. His family escaped from Germany in the mid 30s, I think around about 1937, 38, something like that. So Henry Kissinger was in his teenage years, 15, 16, when he came to America with his family and went to school. I think they landed in New York. My recall is a little hazy, but he went to school in one of the boroughs in New York, which had a lot of immigrants from Central Europe, both Jews and non-Jews, who were fleeing the European situation at that time.
Right.
And so when Kissinger, in 1960s, Kissinger is in his early 40s, Kissinger is establishing himself as a man, as a scholar in a particular field, which is in the area of nuclear strategy and nuclear politics, nuclear diplomacy. He sees in Klaus Schwab a young man that has the potential of achieving some fame, some height, some, be instrumental in the politics of that time. What was the politics of that time? 1964? Well, in 1962, there had been the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
1963, there was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There was the civil rights movement going on. The Vietnam War hadn't started. The Vietnam War would come a little later, but already there was movements inside taking place. President Eisenhower had stepped down in 61. And so it is at that moment, Europe is divided. The world is facing a confrontation between Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact countries on the one side, with America. NATO had been formed by then, 1948, 49. So the world was divided into two power blocks. And Kissinger was making his own contribution, as a historian and a specialist on European history. Europe, as you can see, was the center. It was the ground zero of the confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States, the West and the East. And so that was the area that he would develop his expertise, Kissinger. By the way, Kissinger had been sent. He was a teenager when he arrived, but by the time the war ended in 1945, Kissinger was already in his 20s. He was about, when he was 18, he was drafted into the American army and he was sent to Europe. So he was in Europe in the last part of the war, 1944-45, and then he was recruited into the intelligence service of the army because of his language skills. They needed people with German background and German history to be able to, do the intelligence work in Europe, especially in Germany. And Kissinger was recruited. And in that situation, Kissinger himself was picked up by some very powerful people in the intelligence service of the military who saw this young man, he was then in his early 20s, lot of potential. And so when Kissinger came back, it was through the military, the GI Bill, that he went into graduate school, graduate studies, Harvard, did his PhD, and so on. And then he was brought into that connection. And the connection is the Rockefellers. Kissinger became the advisor to Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller would become the governor of New York. And Nelson Rockefeller was a Republican. He was an East Coast Republican. So that is Kissinger's background. And so when Kissinger was in Harvard and advising Nelson Rockefeller or working with Nelson Rockefeller or for Nelson Rockefeller, he was identified by the establishment in Washington to provide them with the intelligence work that Kissinger got the reputation for. And the CIA began to fund Kissinger's class in Harvard. And that funding that was given to Kissinger was used by Kissinger to recruit young people from around the world, to bring them to Harvard, to train them, and therefore to make them, in that sense, the instrument of American foreign policy, whether they went back to Europe or whether they went back to Africa or India, and so on and so forth. By the way, Obama's father was one of such men who was brought from Kenya to go to university in America, So there is all of these connections that happen. But that's the role of the great powers, and that is something that great powers do because of their connection that is worldwide. Kissinger took Klaus Schwab under him, and Klaus Schwab became, in that sense, made a student of Kissinger, and Kissinger became his
So who
mentor.
were the other two? Who were the other two Ks?
The other two mentors, the second K was John Kenneth Galbraith. Kenneth Galbraith was an economist, a Harvard economist. He was a much older man than Kissinger. He was born in the early 1900s. By the way, John Kenneth Galbraith was of Canadian origin, right from where I am, in London, Ontario. He was from Southern Ontario, born in Southern Ontario, possibly in St. Thomas, if I remember correctly, of Scottish origin, grew up in Ontario. And then after World War I, during that period between the two world wars, Galbraith went to America. He completed his studies in America in economics, got his PhD, again from Harvard. But he rose to fame during World War II in the Office of Economic Management for the Roosevelt administration. And later on, because he was a Harvard professor, and John Kennedy, who would become the president, John Kennedy was from Massachusetts. His father was a big gun in Massachusetts, Joe Kennedy. John Kennedy went to university, that's Harvard, and that's where John came into connection with John Kenneth Galbraith, and John Kenneth Galbraith would become one of the most critical advisor in the career of the young John Kennedy, all the way till John Kennedy became a senator, and then he became the president. And Kenneth Galbraith was one of his principal economic advisors. So as a Harvard man, John Kenneth Galbraith was similarly running seminars on the issues of development economics. Why that? Because in the 1960s, new countries were being born as the European powers were receding, end of decolonization in Africa, in Asia, and so on. and the issue of development was one of the critical issues. By the way, that's also what I studied, in Toronto. And the Klaus Schwab came under John Kenneth Galbraith's wing, and John Kenneth Galbraith became his mentor on the economic side. The third man that he met, the third K, was Herman Kahn. Herman Kahn, same age as Henry Kissinger, born in the 1920s, of Jewish background in New York, grew up in New York, was in some ways a prodigy, a mathematician, and a man of science. But after or during World War II and after World War II, Herman Kahn focused on the whole issue of nuclear strategy. He came to be known subsequently in his life as the man who taught us not to fear the bomb, but to love the bomb. Right. How not to fear the bomb, but love the bomb. So he provided much of the strategic thinking into a situation in politics and in military that was entirely new. I mean, nobody in government fully understood the physics of what had happened that led to the Manhattan Project and the making of the A bomb. These were all done by scientists, mathematicians, others. But now the government had the bomb, and it was a whole totally different world. We had entered the nuclear age, and what did it mean, and how to, make this instrument part of the policy. And soon after, America had the bomb in 1945. In 1949, the Soviets got the bomb. And then there was a race for getting the hydrogen bomb. So this man, that's it. How the CFR taught me to stop worrying and love the bomb. Yeah. There's a famous movie that was made in the 1960s called Dr. Strangelove. Some of the people who are listening to us might know that movie with Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers' Dr. Strangelove was a caricature of Herman Kahn. But this is a very fascinating story, but let me put it in a nutshell. What is the driving force of Kissinger, Kenneth Galbraith, Herman Kahn that focuses in on Klaus Schwab? All of these people and people working with them were extremely concerned of how to prevent a nuclear war from breaking out, number one, how to control it, and in terms of preventing and controlling a war that could escalate to the level of a nuclear war, the fear that was generated, especially as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis, was one that led to a massive expansion of government power out of the control of the elected representatives. That means government, the non-elected branch of the government, the bureaucracy, especially expert, put it in quotation mark, became were in high demand, and they became the driving force, So yes. Much of the decision making shifted from the elected representatives, that is the congressmen and women and the senators, into the hands of the experts who, from the back room, were advising the elected people. And that was the power, and that's exactly the role of all these three people. They had their own supporters, but they had, most importantly, the support of the intelligence organization that rapidly grew, which became...
And they had financial backing by people like the Rockefellers.
That's precisely because, again, it is an interaction of money with power, influence, and the growth in technology. So the fear was there, the fear was manipulated to the extent that the public did not understand, the situation. So whatever the government was telling them, the public went along with that. There was a trust in the government. But at that time, we're going back 60, 70 years later, earlier, the end of the war, and there was a genuine feeling that the political leaders were concerned about the people, that they represented the people. America had won the war. The reputation of America was extremely high, not only among the Americans, but around the world, especially countries that were at the edge of the conflict, as it
Yeah,
is in
but
Europe.
I think it's really interesting, Salim, when you look at Klaus Schwab and when his formidable years in the 30s in Germany, his father being associated, of course, with Hitler and Hitler's approach to growing Germany, and then Klaus translating that and bringing that influence with him to create the World Economic Forum with support of the CFR, with support of the CIA, with the support of Rockefellers, and of course with support of the Club of Rome, which we've all talked about. It's the perfect storm for
Yeah, but
somebody like Schwab to succeed in what he's doing, and I believe it's fascism is
yeah,
ultimately
but
what
Mark,
it
let
is.
me put a corrective here. He did not create it.
Right.
That's what I was
Sure. Sure.
giving the background.
Yeah.
He did not create it. What is happening in the 60s,
He's a
and
puppet.
it just that Klaus Schwab landed in Harvard in 1964,
Right.
you
Right.
know, and he's a young man. He's 25, 26 years old, and he is now sitting in the classroom in graduate seminar in the most famous university. These are the Ivy League school in Massachusetts,
Right.
Harvard. And he's meeting people as a result of being a student of professors
Right.
who were the most well-connected people given their reputation, whether as scientists, as economists, as historians. I think, I'm putting the corrective for a very specific reason. We are in a situation right now in the world because of mass hysteria over the last 2 years, COVID, to understand the mass hysteria of COVID, we can go back to the 1950s and 60s to understand the mass hysteria of the nuclear bomb
Right.
and the possibility that the Western civilization, whatever good, bad, and ugly of the Western civilization, could be eliminated or destroyed by the good, bad, and ugly of the Eastern civilization, the Soviet civilization, because both were equipped with it. So it is like, you are in a room filled with noxious gas, and I am there and you are there, and both of us are holding a match in our hand.
Right. Right.
And if we go to fight, neither of us are going to be the winner because we're going to blow up the room,
Right.
right? So that's why I'm putting this in context to have some understanding by taking a wider perspective, bigger thing. So Klaus Schwab is there as a young man. He has no influence, he has no power.
Right.
He has connection through his father to the people in Europe, in Germany.
Right.
But Germany is
Right.
now a devastated country. It is coming back slowly with the help of the Americans, especially the Federal Republic of Germany, the Marshall Fund, and all of the other money that the Americans are going to have put into Germany to rapidly rebuild Germany, So this young man is at that critical edge that while his father's generation lost the war, his father prepared him to become, through education, come into a position where he could be a leader of his generation.
Right.
you know,
Mm.
and everything is up in the air. But as we have talked about, there are no coincidences. There are planning, but he's not planning. He's the instrument of the plan. If
Right.
we take
Right.
back and look at it,
Yep.
because what is now happening is that the Americans are investing money around the world as a result of Second World War, the devastation that has happened and the rebuilding that is taking on. America is the only country in that sense that has the capacity to do that.
Mm.
Europe had been shattered, and Americans are looking for in Washington and in New York, in places like that, they're looking for people from other parts of the world who will become instrument of their interests,
Right.
their foreign
Right.
policy.
Right.
Okay, so Klaus Schwab was then identified. Henry Kissinger, John Kenneth Galbraith, Herman Kahn, they are now in their. Kenneth Galbraith is the oldest. He is in his 60s. Henry is about 15 years younger than Galbraith, so he's in his 40s, and Kahn is of the same age, but they are very well connected because of being Harvard professor and their own capacity as intellectual. And the major intelligence forces in America who are funded by the financiers, the Rockefellers, the Rothschild, the JP Morgans, and others,
Yep.
funding the intelligence agencies, uh, are using their professional role to push their agenda. So the CFR, Council of Foreign Relations, which was established after the end of World War One, which is the main foreign policy establishment in America, is there. There is the CIA, which was the office of OSS during the war, Office of Strategic Thinking,
Yep.
has now become the Central Intelligence Agency. They are there again with a global outlook. They are recruiting people. They're pushing people. They're making connection with the Europeans. In fact, they're funding the Europeans and making the connections. So Club of Rome was funded again through all of these various organizations to a
Rothschild,
man,
Rockefellers. Yeah.
yeah, Aurelia Pecchia in the 1960s. He
Mm.
was a German-Italian businessman, but he created this Club of Rome. What are these organizations? These organizations are to bring people so they can exchange ideas and network.
Right.
So this is a network. The communist network through communist parties and the trade unions and so on. The Western capitalist market society, they network through corporations,
Mm.
bankers, and financiers. So the word stakeholder that comes up, stakeholder capitalism that comes
Right.
up, is simply Klaus Schwab learned at Harvard. Who are the stakeholder capitalists? The stakeholder capitalists are the big corporations, General
Right.
Dynamics, General Motors,
Mm.
and so on, Chrysler, Ford. I mean, Ford is one of the biggest donors in the world. At
Right.
that time, it was the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. So they are the stakeholder capitalists. They are not in the public getting elected to office. So they don't represent the common Jane and John. They represent themselves
Right.
and they finance the political parties. That was the lesson of 1930s in Hitler's Germany. The stakeholders in Germany, the big corporations in Germany and they financed their political parties. And one of the political parties that they financed was, of course, the Nazi parties. And that's the term of stakeholder
Mm.
capitalism that comes into play now with the World Economic Forum. So by 1971, when Klaus Schwab has already gone back to Switzerland and he has become a professor there in Bern, uh, where his expertise now that he's selling himself is that he knows how to structure companies, that is, bring the financial and bankers together with the manufacturers and create joint companies, and that is the role in which he is meeting the people who his father had introduced him to. So
Right.
he's working for his father's company, the company that his father worked for. But another company came into being in which Klaus Schwab had a very significant role, and that company, Sulzer was also a Swiss German company, took over the expertise in nuclear reactors, and they were the one with Escher Weiss who went on to building nuclear reactor for energy in different parts of the world, especially in Europe, but also in third world countries, and South Africa was one of the places where they ended up. So Klaus Schwab is engaged in that work, and in terms of that work, he is then advised by his mentors in America, KKK, Kissinger, Kenneth Galbraith, and Herman Kahn, to establish some sort of a business gathering of people in Bern. And that's what he does. He starts a club over there. At that time, it is not known as World Economic Forum. It is something like International Business Investors. And he organizes people to come and engage in meeting other people of European background in this world of business and finance. But the idea, as it started playing itself out, he saw was something that he could facilitate in a bigger way. And the bigger way was when he got in touch with the Club of Rome person, Aurelio Pecchia. They were looking for a neutral forum that would reflect to the public outside that these are intellectuals, these are people engaged in public policy for the good of the society. And that's when World Economic Forum was formed in 1971, and
Right.
Davos was selected as the place where people would meet once a year. And in the founding of that World Economic Forum in 1971, John Kenneth Galbraith was invited as the main speaker. In the subsequent conference, Kissinger was there, Herman Kahn was there, Aurelio Piquet was there, and this then started growing. This became, at that time, nobody paid as much attention because the Cold War was on. The biggest issue on the table was now the Vietnam War, the Cold War, the arms negotiation. Kissinger was very busy with the arms negotiation. Nixon was the president. So the SALT agreement, the ABM treaty, and the political leaders needed to meet in some neutral place where they can talk and engage without, being examined or being probed by the media. What are they discussing? That's one. And number two, they needed to find a place where they could get together and listen to other experts who come in there, other professional, and exchange ideas and get to know what is happening from ground up.
Right.
So the fusion of intelligence, finance, and government was what Klaus Schwab was tasked with. And that's what he performed. He became, by 1980s and early 1990s, he became the most well-connected human being in that sense in the Western world. He came to know just about everyone. And the people who he came to know, they were chancellors, they were prime ministers, they were, cabinet members, leading politicians. And so he had no difficulty in raising the funds. And that's what they did. He did, and others helped him to do that. And so by the time we come to the end of the Cold War, World Economic Forum has become, in effect, the clearinghouse of Western thinking, and it has brought in people together who, in many ways, are people either intellectually and genuinely concerned, or it is their fashion. That is the Malthusian theory. The
Yeah, right.
Malthusian theory, those who are familiar with, is the idea that the human population growth is geometric,
Mm.
and the natural resource and its growth is not geometric. And so there is going to be a gap that will emerge
Mm.
between the human population that is growing 2, 4, 8, 16, geometric progression, and the natural resources, food supply particularly, but all the other resources, is not going to keep up with it, and there will be a huge gap. And so what are you going to do with this disparity, this
Right.
inequality?
Limits to growth.
And
Mm.
people came up with all sorts of ideas and arguments, but one of the critical one was eugenics, control the
Mm.
population, stop the population growth. In the 1970s, the biggest issue in economic development in terms of third world development, public policy was birth control.
Right.
As I was growing up in India, I remember seeing, now I can recall, at that time it didn't make sense to me
Mm.
or to any one of us, except that it looked so attractive. The huge billboards put up in towns and villages, uh, glorifying the nuclear family, that the best family, the happiest family, the healthiest family is a
Mm.
family of a man and a woman with 2 children.
Right.
Okay, so this was a worldwide, across Africa, across Latin America, across much of the third world, including North America, because if you now think back to it, the nuclear family issue became huge. The whole debate about abortion,
Mm.
contraception, especially in Catholic society and Catholic tradition. I'm coming from a non-Catholic background. India, vast country, Hindus, Muslim, Christians, and all sorts of people. And nobody at that time, my parents' generation or grandparents' generation, had any clue about what has now become, the
Eugenics. Yeah.
generation after the pill was discovered, the
Right.
1950s. So that was the big issue. One of the defining books of the 1960s was called The Population Bomb by Paul
Mm.
Ehrlich, and he talked about having a policy that the government have to consider very seriously. So he was a professor at Stanford in California, and one of the things that he talked about was called the triage system. In a war, in a
Right.
battlefield.
Triage. Yeah.
Uh, exactly. So
Yep.
the medics have to immediately decide who they can save, who they have to get rid of, and so on and so forth. The
Mm.
triad system, and that was the whole argument being presented. But World Economic Forum became the place where it is, and the Club of Rome idea was very much a Malthusian
Well,
idea that there were.
and it's interesting, fast forward, of course, it's natural that the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, supported, created essentially by the folks at the Club of Rome, or at least inspired there and evolved from that. So it's interesting then to watch the World Economic Forum in 2019 then partner with the UN to achieve these goals. It's obviously a natural uh, union, if not probably already a union there, maybe not formally, for many years leading up to that official partnership.
Right. So once it is, because once they had seeded these ideas in the World Economic Forum,
Yeah.
these ideas became the ideas of World Economic Forum to be then broadcast through their network to the rest.
Yeah.
There was no pushback, because in the case of the Soviet Union at that time, they were not part of this discussion, and there was no pushback
Right.
from that half of the world. The Chinese had gone communist, the Vietnamese were engaged in a war, they were communists, and there was no pushback on any of these ideas about the Malthusian idea that the world is going to
Right.
outrun the resources. And so what have we got to do? We have to eliminate population growth. But there was something very interesting happening at that time. And I just want to put again this on the table. These people, they ran with the idea and therefore the fear that the population is going to outpace the resources, and there's going to be massive famine, massive pandemics, or war that might escalate into the nuclear level, and so we have to control it, and we have to set the policy. So that was their agenda. But there was independent scientists and other groups that were engaged in other work, and the man who is an actual hero, but few people know about him, is a man, an American of, I believe he was of Scandinavian origin, his family. His name was Norman Borlaug, Borlaug. Norman Borlaug was an agronomist, and he was a professor. He became a professor of agronomy, I believe, in Northwestern University up in either Illinois or Minnesota. And he devoted his life to developing hybrid plants. And he discovered the technique of raising corn, maize, and rice in a manner in which people could get rid of shortages, and he succeeded. He was given the Nobel Peace Prize in the 1970s for his work in terms of developing what is called high yield crops. So rice, maize, corn, these are the staple crops. And he set up a center in Philippines for testing it and then exporting those ideas. And the reason I'm mentioning that was the country that was facing the greatest threat of famine was China and India, with the population that it is there, as you can see. And in the 1970s came the first oil shock with the Arab-Israeli war and the escalation of price that shot up. The people now looking back, what we are going through right now is simply the repeat of what happened in the 1970s. War and prices quadruple. And the third world countries were the worst hit as a result of the rise in oil prices and energy prices. And the case of famine in India was at the crossroad. But this man, Norman Borlaug, saved India. I remember this because I was a teenager growing up, and at that time, the Prime Minister of India, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, began talking about the Green Revolution. And it was the Green Revolution mean transforming agriculture and bringing about this high yield rice and corn and others. And she succeeded. And since 1973, despite the oil price quadrupling, India went from a net importing country in terms of food, and one of the major supplier of food grain to India from your part of the world, Mark, that is from the prairie provinces. It was John Diefenbaker's government in the 1950s that built up that supply chain, that India was one of the highest recipients of Canadian grains, to stave off the famine. But by mid 1970s into early 1980s, India had solved the food problem as a
Right.
result of
Right.
Norman
So
Borlaug.
so
Same
human
thing happened in China.
so human ingenuity, humanity essentially will resolve these issues. It doesn't take this
100%.
group of elites to dictate to the rest of us what's going to happen. Allow freedom, the free market, and people will invent. People will come up with solutions to these problems.
Exactly. I mean, all the arguments that were being made by the Club of Rome people and the whole lot, they were not alone. As I said, people like Paul Ehrlich in Stanford
Right.
University, people in Harvard and Princeton,
Mm.
all of these intellectuals, professors, and others on the public policy side were making the argument of that population is going to outstrip resources,
Right.
were being turned on its head by the other side, which is people independently, in terms of human ingenuity, working to counter those arguments by actually doing the opposite,
Right.
discovering new resources, discovering new ways. For instance, in the case of fossil fuel, I mean, what happened in America during Trump's presidency, the technology of fraction
Fracking.
was developed, but it was frozen. They didn't want to bring it into action. Trump brought into action, and within
Right.
4 years, America, from being a net importer of energy, became a net exporter of
Exporter.
energy,
Yep.
and became supply. We have it in Canada, but it is the ideological conviction
Mm.
of people in the World Economic Forum who are coming with the ideas that go back to the 1950s and 60s, that population is going to outstrip
Right.
the natural resources, and therefore the population has to be controlled and reduced. And that is exactly at play right now, which is where we have arrived. And
And so
Klaus Schwab,
and so I'm going to stop you there, Salim. We've been at it for about an hour and a half, and I'd like to take off Friday and start
sure,
at this point and move
absolutely.
into how the events of today were shaped and orchestrated and manipulated by these people.
100%. I just want to take a couple of minutes and point out the Canadian side of this. You mentioned Maurice Strong.
Yep.
Um, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was a member of Club of Rome.
Yep.
Pierre Elliott Trudeau was, in effect, also a student of John Kenneth Galbraith. As I mentioned right at the beginning, Kenneth Galbraith was a Canadian, born in
Yep.
Canada, who moved to America, took out American citizenship, and became a leading intellectual, both in the Roosevelt administration and then in the Kennedy administration. And his book, the most important book on this matter, is the title is New Industrial State. If anyone wants to go and read that book, now it is not available. You have to go to the library. It's out of print. But if anybody who's interested can pull it out, they will get a full understanding of what is the meaning of stakeholder capitalism.
Right.
The title of the book is New Industrial State. It is the fusion of the stakeholders, the giant corporation, with the political decision making, which is what actually happened in Germany in the 1930s under Hitler. So our prime minister, former prime minister, the father of the current prime minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was very much in that network.
Yep.
He was 20 years senior to Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab was born in 1938. Pierre Trudeau was born in 1919. So 20 years, roughly 20 years older. But he was about 15 years younger than Kenneth Galbraith. And when Trudeau went to Harvard, he ran into Kenneth Galbraith.
Of course
And
he did.
then when he became the prime minister in 1968, and especially when he was running after the War Measures Act of 72, when his government was reduced to a minority, but then he ran the 74 election against Robert Stanfield. His key economic advisor was John Kenneth Galbraith. So these are fascinating connection, because it is not policy simply, it's not ideas simply, it is people and the network. And that is what Klaus Schwab did. So this whole young global leaders, well, he was a young man who came to America at early 20s or mid 20s in Harvard, where he was picked up by the 3Ks, the most influential professors at Harvard at that time. He was picked up. Well, the young global leader is the idea that he takes back to Davos to identify young potential people in college, in high school, bring them to
Politics.
well, they will get shaped into politics, yes, if they're already in the politics, but you pick them up when they are in the high school or undergraduate. You bring them as intern to Davos for 6 months. They have enough money to do that, and
Right.
and then they mingle around there with these people in awe. It's like a young man or a woman going to Hollywood, and you're sitting there with the big stars of today, Al Pacino and everybody else.
Just on that note, I want whoever's watching, whatever city you're in, go Google your city and then Google Global Shapers World Economic Forum. There will be a hub in your city if it's big
Exactly.
enough. And these are all influenced by World Economic Forum.
So these young people then come back, and they have already been given the ideas, but they're carrying the resume. And so they walk into, whether it's Royal Bank, whether they walk into any of the big stakeholders, they will be immediately hired. They will have a fast track rise. That's the story of Chrystia Freeland.
Yep.
It is not that Chrystia Freeland has an IQ of 250. It is Chrystia Freeland who has an IQ that can be manipulated perfectly by the World Economic Forum.
100%.
And she is put in there by George Soros and Bill Gates and others. Same thing with Justin Trudeau. Same thing with Pierre Poilievre. Same thing with Jason Kenney, and all of them. All of them. This is what it is. On the flip side, with the communists who put their people into trade unions, into factories, and they made a quick, fast rise. Similarly. So that's the stakeholder capitalism we are talking about. And it is all about control. And so
100%.
in one world, governance would mean basically controlling the world, and through your chosen people who are your pawns, and people don't know where the information is coming from.
And this is why I say, Salim, that people are scared of falling under global governance. We're already there.
We're there. We're
there. I mean, all of our politicians are being told what to do. They're being instructed to what to do, right from federal, provincial, municipal, RM. That's the reality, and so. Here we go. So
as we close up, I mean, what you're saying is not only people in government, it's the media. Media is the most important control mechanism.
100%.
And so it is very interesting to hear Pierre Poilievre talking about that he is going to defund CBC. Now, where did I hear that? Well, I heard that with Stephen Harper. Well, where did I hear that? I heard that with Stockwell Day.
Yeah.
Well, Stockwell Day never became the prime minister, but Stephen Harper became the prime minister. When he was running, he talked about defunding the CBC. And what happened during his time as prime minister? He was hiring journalists to become senators.
Right.
Like Mike Duffy, like Pamela Wallens. And of course, kept the CBC fully funded. So these are talking points to confuse the people. The people are going to be readily confused. Pierre Poilievre is, I don't think he's going to make it, but he will give a run to Jean Charest. Jean Charest has already come out and said that he's fully committed to the Paris Accord, the climate change.
So you
So
think
there you have it.
you think Charest is the one that's been tapped?
Oh, sorry, Jean Charest. Jean Charest.
Do you think Charest is the one that's been tapped? I think it's Poilievre that's tapped. That's how I look at it.
Well, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But I think Jean Charest is tapped because the Conservative Party, which is back to, it is just the spare wheel of the Laurentian elite, as I keep saying.
Yep.
They are going to, already the signs are there. They're going to do exactly what the Liberal Party does to show the Canadian bilingual, bicultural factor, that you have a Anglophone leader followed by a Francophone leader. So if you go back to just 2000, beginning of 2000, the 21st century, the leader was Jacques Chrétien, a Francophone. He stepped down. Paul Martin became the leader, an Anglophone, right? Then when Paul Martin stepped down, who became the leader? And it was a Francophone. The guy, I'm forgetting, Stéphane Dion. Stéphane Dion became the leader. Then when Stéphane Dion stepped down, who became the leader? There was an interim leader, but Michael Ignatieff, an Anglophone. And then when Michael Ignatieff left after the defeat in 2011 election, the interim leader was Bob Rae, and then Bob Rae was removed, and Justin Trudeau became the leader, a Francophone who won the election in 2015, or, the election was comprised. So my reading is that we are in this, we're going to see with the Conservative the same play. We had Brian Mulroney, though he was an Irishman, Irish Canadian, but he was Francophone. He came from Quebec, Baie-Comeau, followed by Kim Campbell. Jean Charest was defeated by Kim Campbell. The reason being you couldn't have two Quebecois as leaders of the party. So Kim Campbell became the leader. And then Peter MacKay took over. And then it was the fusion of Peter MacKay, PC, with Reform Party, with Stephen Harper. And Stephen Harper was an Anglophone. But in Canada, in the Conservative side, we haven't had a Francophone take over. I think it is now time that they're going to remember. There's the Dominion machine there.
Yes, there is, and that's somebody brought that up and asked, "Well, who's counting the votes?" And I said, "That's a very interesting question. Dominion will be counting these votes."
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, so, and that's what made me wonder, because I really think Poilievre was tapped, but there's a part of me that can see this being manipulated in favor of Charest. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see that exactly.
Okay, Good night. Friday, let's continue this discussion and really get into the Ukraine
war, how it is connected with
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, my friend. Another great discussion.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, sir. All right, another good discussion with my good friend Salim Mansur. He's a genius, and he's got so much information in that brain that he's able to tap into. It's always impressive. I'm always a lot smarter after spending some time with Salim, that's for sure. So that's a wrap for this one. Just a couple of things. I am starting to do speaking engagements in Saskatchewan. April 23rd, we have Esther Hazy. Looking forward to that one. We're also working on another one. Hang on, my dogs are going nuts. Can you guys shut up? We're also doing another one, or looking at doing another one in Swift Current. No dates as of yet. We're still working on it. But if your community is wanting us to come there and speak in regards to what's happening in the world, by all means, just get in touch with me. We're basically doing the same thing that we did before I got sick. And that is essentially, globalism, the Great Reset, how this is all tied together. There's some new information that we're adding, of course, because it's always fluid. So yeah, we have to do it on the weekends because RB is working full time during the week. So we have to schedule these speaking engagements during the weekend. So if you're interested, your community's interested, get in touch with me. And other than that, that's about it. And big shout out to all the folks over on DLive. You guys are awesome. Share this out. It's on YouTube and it's on Twitter, and it'll be uploaded onto Rumble here shortly. So please share this out. These are important discussions. And when you have somebody of Salim's knowledge and education and wherewithal, we have to take advantage of it and make sure we expose as many people to this information as possible. Well, guess that's about it for tonight. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Friday night looks like me and Salim again. And remember, globalism bad, nationalism good. Ciao for now.